Namaskar, Nilesh here with another session of Shraddha and Pradnya. This would be part 31. I would like to cover three specific points. They are very central, very important, very critical to the Vijnana Buddhi, to scientific acumen, necessary and sufficient conditions. And then quickly, I would like to talk about consistency. Okay, just a quick, simple example. But keep this in mind because we need to keep this in mind as we understand some of the specific observations, or how do we distinguish between two claims. Somebody may be saying something, but those may not be necessary and sufficient conditions, or whatever they are claiming may not be consistent. Let's look at the necessary condition. For example, the sun being above the horizon is a necessary condition for direct sunlight, but it is not a sufficient condition, as something else may be casting a shadow. For example, the eclipse, where the moon might be covering the sun, and therefore direct sunlight may not reach us. Now, it doesn't have to be as extreme as an eclipse. For example, clouds can do the same thing. Dark clouds can do the same thing. Even the white clouds in sufficient number can do the same thing. And we may not able to see direct sunlight. Okay. Therefore, we are saying sun being above the horizon is a necessary condition for direct sunlight, but not a sufficient condition. We also need a clear sky and so on and so forth. Let's look at somewhat the other way, okay, which is to say, let us say you are traveling somewhere and that you look at the train schedule and you find out that train is running on schedule, and therefore it is a sufficient condition for arriving on time. But it is not always a necessary condition. In what way? Okay, because since there are other ways to travel, you may able to take a bus, you may able to fly by plane and still reach your destination in time. Okay, so in this case, you have certain piece of information that is considered a sufficient condition, okay, but it's not always a necessary condition. Okay, so that's just a sort of a distinction, or the two different scenarios. Now let's bring them together in the context of how, when we look at the evidence, and when there are overlapping areas. For example, we have seen the Vakri motion, for example, the Vakri motions for in Mahabharata text, Vakri motions for Mars, Vakri motions for Jupiter. And if you have seen all my previous episodes in series, and you ought to see them, otherwise you're not able to make connection with these, is Vakri motion of Mars again at the time of a Kamsavada. Not only at the time of Mahabharata war, but at the time of a Kamsavada is also given in Harivamsha. And how beautifully that matches for the timing of the killing of a Kamsa. Okay, so Vakri is that middle portion. Okay, so now think of it. I said necessary, sufficient, but also one more thing I mentioned, and I'm going to show it to you in a second, is the consistency. Now, consistency has many variations, okay? We will look at one type of consistency here, but there are other aspects of consistency that we will talk in future episodes when the timing is relevant. But in this case, in this diagram, look at the central portion in purple. Okay, so think of this as a Vakri. So what does that mean? Suppose A represents the Mars descriptions, Mars astronomy evidence, and B represents Jupiter astronomy evidence. Okay, then we are looking here, A and B, at the evidence that is overlapping between the two. Now, what kind of evidence we have? We have actually two types of evidence, which is one is Vakri, that which is oblique crossing of the planet across the ecliptic. We have two instances of Mars going Vakri, once near Magha, another time near Jyeshta Anuradha. And we have one instance of Jupiter going Vakri, which is again oblique crossing around Nakshatra Shravan. So that Vakri is that middle purple portion. And what is required there? That the way we describe Vakri for the two instances of Mars is exactly the same way we describe Vakri of Jupiter. Now that condition comes from a consistency. Okay, it comes as a necessary and sufficient condition, because otherwise we have two different definitions of vakri. Okay, so that's one type of thing. Now, what do we see here? Being in the purple region is sufficient for being in A, but not necessary. Okay, you can stop the video, meditate on that if that doesn't become clear to you, to truly understand what it means. Being in the purple region is sufficient for being in A, but not necessary. Why is that? Okay, because you could be not in the purple region either. Being in A is necessary for being in the purple region, but not sufficient. Why? Because again, you could be outside here. Now, the way the diagram is drawn, the Venn diagram is drawn, think of it, being in the bullet number 3, being in A and being in B is necessary and sufficient for being in the purple region. Is necessary. Okay, you have to be in A, you have to be in B. Okay, and if both of those conditions are matched, you are in A, but also in B, we don't need to worry, because the overlapping area is all purple area, and we immediately can draw the conclusion that yes, you are in the purple region. If you are in A and if you are in B, as shown in this Venn diagram, it's a guarantee that you are going to be in the purple region. Therefore, we can say the necessity and the sufficiency, those both conditions are matched. Okay. All right. Now let's look at consistency. As I said, there are many nuances to it, but we'll look at the one specific one here. And as we go through additional episodes, when other aspects of consistency show up, I will mention those. These are 6 characteristics of science. Okay, there are many characteristics. These are some key characteristics, you can say, okay, that can help you almost as a rule of thumb in quickly evaluating any claim, okay, any claim individually, but also evaluating multiple claims, or think of simply as a simple picture, think of evaluating 2 claims. You can use these 6 criteria to quickly evaluate any given claim, such as say my claim, but you can also evaluate 2 claims together to see which one is appearing better. Okay. All right. So consistency. Several scientists can repeat an experiment and the results are the same. So for example, when I say between say 11,091 BC to 4508 BC, that is the only time when Arundhati would be seen walking ahead of Vasishtha. Now, of course, someone like Siddhartha Chabra refined that with data. So we always need to know what's the background data and so on. I used the data that was old, like 14, 15 years old. So Siddhartha Chabra used a data which is 3 years old, more refined. And what could he do? Instead of 11,091 to 4508 BC, when he did the same repetition of that experiment, so he was trying to check, he was looking for consistency essentially. He was testing that element. Whatever am I saying, am I claiming, I am asserting, is that true? That's what he wanted to check and test. So when he did that with the data, what happened? Because he was using more precise data, actually the interval that he identified narrowed down. Okay, so I said 11,091 to 4508 BC for Arundhati walking ahead of Vasishtha. He actually did the experiment to find out that actually the interval is even tighter. Okay, from 10,248 BC to 4636 BC. So what does that mean? I would have said Mahabharata war, just based on Arundhati Vasishtha observation, Mahabharata war is impossible anytime after 4508 BC. With his data and his validation, okay, his experiment, now we can say that Mahabharata war, just based on Arundhati Vasishtha, one observation alone, we can say that Mahabharata war is definitely not possible anytime after 4636 BC. That's a good example of consistency. Observability. Okay, the results or subject of an experiment can be observed by using the 5 senses or extensions of them. 5 senses as in like seeing, hearing, okay, touch, smell, and so on and so forth, whatever is appropriate. Now, beautiful language that is used. five senses or extensions of them. Now, how do we observe something, okay, that happened in the past? Basically, we do that with the extensions, such as what? Such as astronomy software or mathematical calculations based on astronomy formulae and so on. What about something that we cannot see with a naked eye? Well, we need a telescope or telescopic ability. How about something that is too small to see with our naked eyes? We need microscope or microscopic ability. That's what we mean by extension. Still, our senses are involved. Okay. And why just say five external senses? Like in the Indian context, we use the word antakaran. Okay, these indriya, but antakaran, like using the mind and a buddhi, those are also senses. Okay, that's why we have in Bhagavad Gita, bhumi rapo nalo vayu kha mana buddhi revacha ahankara vimudhatma. So kha mana buddhi ahankar, okay, mana buddhi ahankar, these are our antahkarana, inner tools or inner senses. They are also to be used. Okay, let's go to the next one. Natural. A natural cause must be used to explain why or how the naturally occurring result or experimental subject happens. Supernatural cannot be used. What would be a good example of this? A natural cause in a Nyaya Darshana or even our Shad Darshana, the word used is a Karya Karana Bhav. Okay. Now, we may not always be successful, at least not immediately, in understanding why is this happening, why it is behaving like this. Just take example of Arundhati Vasishta. In fact, after spending 15 years, when I figured out that finally, yes, Arundhati indeed went ahead of Vasishta, and very crudely I calculated like a 6,000, 7,000 year time interval when it would have gone up. This is going back 8 May 2009. At that night, if you would have asked me, or even the next day morning, so Nilesh, why does that happen? Why Arundhati has gone ahead of Vasishta? Guys, I could tell you as a crude answer, I would have said, hey, I don't know exactly what's happening, but very likely it has to do with the precession of the Earth's axis, plus maybe nutation, who knows, right? That's all I could have told you. Then I have to sit down and go through over another day or so before I could figure out the natural cause. Okay, of course, I'm going back in time. The only thing that's changing is the precession. So that's why I could have approximately told you, but not in a meaningful way. It took time. So, but my point is, it cannot be supernatural explanation, such as, oh, maybe it was only in the mind of a vassal. Now, someone like Shrikant Talagiriji has proposed such kind of theory. I mean, it's not even a theory. It's not scientific. It's not logical. Now, somebody will ask, well, so isn't it possible that actually in reality nothing is happening and some sage or some author, like the fiction writer author, can think about it? Yeah, absolutely, they can think about it, but then it is a fiction. Then it is not a real thing. Okay. Or we have to say something is just appears to be uh, in the dream of a author or in the mind of an author, but then it cannot be scientifically tested. Okay, just like in a science fiction, the person can do whatever, the person can write, the author can write whatever they want. Then no longer, then let's not talk about science, let's not talk about logic. That is the point. But if you're going to talk about empirical, if you're going to talk about pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, shabda, pramanani, agama, then supernatural is not acceptable. That is the point. Then we can take certain things with Shraddha, like what happens after death, what happens between the two lifetimes, through the reincarnation. Yeah, we don't have anything. Our science and technology has not evolved to the extent of finding this out. So what do? We depend on some mystic experiences of certain individuals, but their experience may be real, but we have no way of verifying based on number one, consistency. We have no way of replicating that experience. We take it purely with a Shraddha, Ujja Buddhi. Okay, that's what I mean. And so it's not empirical, therefore it's not scientific. Now, opposite of scientific is not like unscientific. Actually, many cases it is metaphysical. Okay, which means atarkya. Okay, our science and technology has not caught up with it. So how do we do it? How do we deal with that? That's a different subject. I don't want to extend the timing of this. Okay. Let's go to predictability. Predictions can be made about the subject and can be tested. In fact, if you are proposing a theory, and if the theory is scientific in nature, which is to say it is generic and it is universal, then it should lead to certain predictions, which in principle at least can be verified, can be tested, can be corroborated empirically. That's what this predictability is saying. Predictions can be made about the subject meaning whatever the subject matter you're researching about or about which you proposed a theory, and it should be testable. At least in principle, it should be testable. And until you test it and until you validate, you have no reason to say that your theory is good or your theory is tested or your theory is better. Keep this in mind as we explore, okay, all the hollow claims of many pseudo researchers, okay, not just for Mahabharata, but also Ramayana, even Sushruta, many subjects. Let's go to two more. Testability. Subject can be tested using a control experiment, like software is one, mathematical calculations is another. You can do something in the lab. You can go back to same historical site and do additional excavation and so on and so forth. Then the tentativeness, which is very important, very, very crucial. Scientific theories are subject to change because of technology. That's kind of crudely written, but that's fine. Scientific theories are all conjectures, and we are looking at what is a better conjecture. We are always making, or most cases, I should say, making a progress towards our growth of knowledge, but we are never sure that this is the final theory. Actually, many people prematurely thought so about Newton's theory. They were so wowed with the predictions of Newton's theory and actually their validation. They said, this is done. We finally have found out everything we want to know, only to be surprised very soon. Okay, so there is that tentativeness of it, which is to say, how does this comes to us in a practical life? Anyone who claims a certain theory, certain claim, therefore, ask that person under what circumstances your theory, your claim can be falsified or will come out to be wrong, come out to be false. If the person cannot provide a very clear answer, okay, or even multiple answers, then the person does not have a scientific theory, because the characteristic in a very scientific technical language is that a scientific theory is always refutable. Now, in the ordinary language, we use the word, oh, that person has provided irrefutable evidence. That person has proposed an irrefutable theory. Oh, his theory is so great, it's irrefutable. This is the common language we use. And yeah, we should understand what they mean. But if you want to be very precise, accurate, technically correct, scientifically correct, the language actually is that a true scientific theory is always refutable, which is to say that last tentativeness, you should be able to state under what circumstances that theory will come out to be a false theory, come out to be wrong, maybe closer approximation, but still wrong. Okay, and again, I can give you a lot of examples, but then the timing can get bigger and longer and so on. Now, quickly at the bottom, they add some few things and they're worth noticing. I won't spend time on this, just other than reading them. Science has all the 6 characteristics. Actually, as I said, there are more than 6 characteristics, but this is a good list to use while evaluating any given claim or while comparing 2 claims side by side. Pseudoscience. Now, this is where we have to be important. We have to be very careful. Okay. And that's why I like this list. Pseudoscience actually can, out of the 6, can actually have 5, 4, or 3 of the characteristics. Isn't that interesting? Actually, and see, that's why people feel confused. Okay. Somebody will say, hey, I have this, I have this, I have this. A pseudoscientific claim can have up to 5, but not all 6. And non-science, it says, has 2, 1, or none of the characteristics. Okay. All right. Let's go. Yeah, I'll just stop here. And some of the illustrations from astronomy and cosmology for this consistency, but also the what do you call the 6 characteristics, consistency, but also you can think of the necessary and sufficient conditions. Okay. But consistency, what happens is if for example, the way I described Vakri motions of Mars, like 2 instances, and when it comes to explaining the Vakri motion of Jupiter, I use a completely different explanation for Vakri. That means my theory of Vakri has no consistency. Okay. And for many ordinary people, that doesn't matter. I mean, it should matter, but if they are not thinking from the scientific perspective, therefore I said this is about Vijnana Buddhi or scientific acumen, they say, to kya ho gaya? Which means they see, ordinary life, they can still live their life. I mean, Shankaracharya says, Satyanrute dve mithunikrutya vartate lokayatra. Okay. General everyday living of all of us happens with what? All the information we have, some of it is truthful, others is not truthful. Like the politicians are giving us promises every day. Some of them are true, others, most of them are not. But life goes on. Like people still go and vote for a certain candidate, trusting that person, and so on. I just took politics as an extreme example, but that's true for many other things. We say, hey, is this a good quality? Something we are buying, from a grocer, like fruits or flowers. Are they fresh? The person says, yes, they are fresh, and they may not be fresh. That's what I mean by the mix. Even Manu talks about it in a vyavasay, like in a business, satyanrute, it's a mixture of truth and a falsehood. So ordinary people may not feel so surprised about it. Say, what's the problem? In science, in scientific thinking, it is a problem. And why is that a problem? Well, maybe not in everything, but in certain cases, it is a problem. For example, if we are convinced, even just on a Shraddha Buddhi, that there was only one Mahabharata war. Okay. Now, even to deal with this problem, people have created all kinds of nonsense, such as, every kalpa there is a Mahabharata war. Every kalpa Ram or Bhagwan Ram comes again. These are all later interpolations, to confuse the matter. Okay. Or maybe it's done to somehow pacify somebody who, to whom it is very difficult to explain the Vijnana Buddhi. Okay. So some of the examples where in the recent times, we can say last 500 years, all of them from the Western modern science, you can say, is like, take the example, age of the earth. You remember? Therefore, I'm saying Western science or Western Europe. They were thinking until very recently, okay, that say 150 years ago, they were thinking the whole earth, and even they were thinking cosmos is only 6,000 year old. Okay. So that goes into the second big point too, Hubble constant and age of universe. So I'm not going to go into the details. Again, the session gets extended, but you can just type these, or you can look at how old is the earth, and look at some debates going on, debates of the past last 100 200 years. So age of the earth began with Darwin, especially, like the regurgitation or the manthan began again, or restarted in Europe with Darwin, with his theory of evolution, and then fossils being dated to a very long time, and so on and so forth. Hubble constant and age of the universe started with Western Europe coming in contact with the Indian astronomy, and then they're trying to explore more with much more sophisticated technology, and trying to figure out the age of the universe and some of the issues, special relativity, general relativity. So basically what? That is going beyond Newton's theory of gravity, which not that long ago, just after Newton, next 100 years, people in Western Europe were so impressed with it, they thought this is the end of everything that we want to know. Okay. And lo and behold, now we have more questions than we can think of, in spite of much more progress after Newton through special relativity, general relativity, and so on. I think that's all I have. Yeah. Okay. So now where are we going to apply this? So I'll just go fast through this. So remember, I have shown this to you before. This is like that Venn diagram for necessary and sufficient conditions that I showed you. Okay. So for example, retrograde. Now, who is affected by this retrograde? Okay. I have this circle here. That's Mars. Okay, I have this circle here of a Saturn. I have this circle here of Jupiter, and I also have a circle of a Venus. So the retrograde description, retrograde criteria, the way I would use from Mahabharata evidence, if I'm claiming there are Mahabharata text is giving retrograde descriptions of Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Venus, then my criteria should be consistent in the way I explain, use those descriptions, explain that why they are retrograde, but also successfully able to show the retrograde motions of these four planets as described in the Mahabharata text for the year I am claiming, for the year of Mahabharata war. Vakra I already mentioned. So Vakra is common to what? To Jupiter and Mars. So the way I explain the two instances of Mars Vakri motion is exactly the way I should able to explain it for a Jupiter. What about Pida? The way I explain Sun and Moon giving Pida to Rohini is the exactly same way I should able to explain Saturn giving Pida to Rohini and Jupiter giving Pida to Rohini. What about the Tishtita and Akramya? The way I use either Akramya or Tishtita or a combination of the both for Jupiter is the exactly same way I should able to explain Saturn, because remember the overlap. It is between Saturn, Jupiter, and comet near Pusha. So there is some comet. For these three, I should able to explain Akramya and Tishtita, or Akramya or Tishtita, depending on whether it only Akramya occurs or only Tishtita occurs. In the same way, that is that consistency. But also we looked at necessary and sufficient conditions. All right. So keep this in mind as we go through additional and future episodes of Shraddha and Pradnya, specifically in the context of Mahabharata evidence. But guys, this will apply to anything and everything that I discuss in this particular series. All right. So with that, I will stop. I'll see you soon in another session of Shraddha and Pradnya. Okay. Namaskar.